He set to bathing the little boy with cold rainwater that they brought new fallen from out of doors, and he began to say one of the spells of fever stay. The spell took no hold and made no whole, and suddenly he thought the child was dying in his arms. Summoning his power all at once and with no thought for himself, he sent his spirit out after the child's spirit to bring it back home. He called the child's name, Iowa! Thinking some faint answer came in his inward hearing, he pursued, calling once more. Then he saw the little boy running fast and far ahead of him down a dark slope, the side of some vast hill. There was no sound. The stars above the hill were no stars his eyes had ever seen, yet he knew the constellations by name, the sheaf, the door, the one who turns, the tree. They were those stars that do not set, that are paled by the coming of any day. He had followed the dying child too far. Knowing this, he found himself alone on the dark hillside. It was hard to turn back, very hard. He turned slowly. Slowly, he set one foot forward to climb back up the hill, and then the other. Step by step he went. Each step willed, and each step was harder than the last. The stars did not move. No wind blew over the dry, steep ground. In all the vast kingdom of the darkness, only he moved, slowly, climbing. He came to the top of the hill and saw the low wall of stones there. But across the wall, facing him, there was a shadow. The shadow did not have the shape of man or beast. It was shapeless, scarcely to be seen, but it whispered at him, though there are no words in its whispering, and it reached out towards him. And it stood on the side of the living, and he on the side of the dead. Either he must go down the hill into the desert lands and lightless cities of the dead, or he must step across the wall, back into life, where the formless evil thing waited for him. His spirit staff was in his hand, and he raised it high. With that motion, strength came into him. As he made to leap the low wall of stone straight at the shadow, the staff burned suddenly white, a blinding light in that dim place. He leaped, felt himself fall, and saw no more. Now what Petvari and his wife and the witch saw was this. The young wizard had stopped midway in his spell and held the child a while motionless. Then he had laid little Iowa gently down in the palace and had risen and stood silent, staff in hand. All at once he raised the staff high, and it blazed with white fire, as if he held the lightning bolt in his grip. And all the household things in the hut leaped out strange and vivid in that momentary fire. When their eyes were clear from the dazzlement, they saw the young man laying huddled forward on the eastern floor, beside the pallet where the child lay dead. To Petvari, it seemed that the wizard also was dead. His wife wept, but he was utterly bewildered. But the witch had some hearsay knowledge concerning magery and the ways a true wizard may go, and she saw to it that Ged, cold and lifeless as he lay, was not treated as a dead man, but as one sick or tranced. He was carried home, and an old woman was left to watch and see whether he slept to wake or slept forever. The little otak was hiding in the rafters of the house, as it did when strangers entered. There it stayed while the rain beat on the walls and the fire sank down and the night, wearing slowly along, left the old woman nodding beside the hearth pit. Then the otak crept down and came to Ged, where he lay stretched stiff and still upon the bed. It began to lick his hands and wrists, long and patiently, with its dry, leaf-brown tongue. Crouching beside his head, it licked his temple, his scarred cheek, and softly his closed eyes. And very slowly, under that soft touch, Ged roused. He woke, not knowing where he'd been, or where he was, or what was the faint gray light in the air about him, which was the light of dawn coming to the world. Then the otak curled up near his shoulder as usual, and went to sleep. Later, when Ged thought back upon that night, he knew that had none touched him where he lay thus spirit lost, had none called him back in some way, he might have been lost for good. It was only the dumb, instinctive wisdom of the beast who licks his hurt companion to comfort him. And yet in that wisdom, Ged saw something akin to his own power, something that went as deep as wizardry. From that time forth, he believed that the wise man is one who never sets himself apart from other living things, whether they have speech or not. And in later years, he strove long to learn what can be learned in silence, from the eyes of animals, the flight of birds, the great slow gestures of trees. He had now made unscathed, for the first time, that crossing over and return which only a great wizard can make with open eyes, and which not the greatest mage can make without risk. But he had returned to a grief and a fear. The grief was for his friend Pekvari. The fear was for himself. He knew now why the Archmage had feared to send him forth, and what had darkened and clouded even the mage's foreseeing of his future. For it was darkness itself that had awaited him, the unnamed thing, the being that did not belong in this world, the shadow he had loosed or made. In spirit, at the boundary wall between death and life, it had waited for him these long years. It had found him there at last. It would be on his track now, seeking to draw near to him, to take his strength into itself and suck up his life and clothe itself in his flesh. Soon after, he dreamed of a thing like a bear with no head or face. He thought it went fumbling about the walls of the house, searching for the door. Such a dream he had not dreamed since the healing of the wounds the thing had given him. When he woke, he was weak and cold, and the scars on his face and shoulder drew and ached. Now began a bad time. When he dreamed of the shadow, or so much as thought of it, he felt always that same cold dread. Sense and power drained out of him, leaving him stupid and astray. He raged at his cowardice, but that did no good. He sought for some protection, but there was none. The thing was not flesh, not alive, not spirit, unnamed, having no being but what he himself had given it, a terrible power outside the laws of the sunlit world. All he knew of it was that it was drawn to him and would try to work its will through him, being his creature. But in what form it could come, having no form of its own as yet, and how it would come and when it would come, this he did not know. He set up what barriers of sorcery he could about his house and about the isle where he lived. Such spell walls must be ever renewed, and soon he saw that if he spent all his strength on these defenses, he would be of no use to the islanders. What could he do between two enemies if a dragon came from Pendor? Again, he dreamed. But this time in the dream, the shadow was inside his house, beside the door, reaching out to him through the darkness and whispering words he did not understand. He woke in terror and sent the werelight flaming through the air, lighting every corner of the little house till he saw no shadow anywhere. Then he put wood in the coals of his fire pit and sat in the firelight, hearing the autumn wind fingering at the thatched roof and whining in the great bared trees above, and he pondered long. An old anger had awakened in his heart. He would not suffer this helpless waiting, this sitting trapped on the little island muttering useless spells of lock and ward. Yet he could not simply flee the trap. To do so would be to break his trust with the islanders and leave them to the imminent dragon undefended. There was but one way to take. The next morning, he went down among the fishermen in the principal moorage of Low Torning, and finding the head isleman there, he said to him, "I must leave this place. I am in danger, and I put you in danger. I must go. Therefore, I ask your leave to go out and do away with the dragons on Pendor, so that my task for you will be finished and I may leave freely. Or if I fail, I should fail also when they come here, and that is better known now than later." The Isleman stared at him all drop-jarred. "Lord Sparrowhawk," he said, "there are 9 dragons out there." "8 are still young," they said. "But the old one—" "I tell you I must go from here. I ask your leave to rid you of the dragon peril first, if I can do so." "As you will, sir," the Isleman said gloomily. All that listened there thought this was a folly, or a crazy courage in their young wizard, and with sullen faces they saw him go, expecting no news of him again. Some hinted that he meant merely to sail back to Hosk, to the inmost sea, leaving them in the lurch. Others, among them Pekvari, held that he had gone mad and sought death. For 4 generations of men, all ships had set their course to keep far from the shores of Pendor Island. No mage had ever come to do combat with the dragon there, for the island was on no traveled sea road, and its lords had been pirates, slave-takers, war-makers, hated by all that dwelt in the southwest parts of Earthsea. For this reason, none had sought to revenge the Lord of Pendor after the dragon had come suddenly out of the west upon him and his men, where they sat feasting in the tower, and smothered them with the flames of his mouth, and drove all the townsfolk screaming into the sea. Unavenged, Pendor had been left to the dragon, with all its bones and towers and jewels stolen from long-dead princes of the coast of Helm and Host.